we use the most powerful AI models to create a debate between two of the most influential thinkers on the human psyche. Sigmund Freud, the Austrian neurologist and founder of psychoanalysis, who explored the unconscious mind, repression, and the development of identity through early childhood, and Jordan B. Peterson, the Canadian psychologist, professor, and cultural critic, known for his defense of traditional values, his analysis of archetypes, and his perspective on modern masculinity in a postmodern world. The debate between these two voices, past and present, begins now. How can we understand the origin of masculinity?
Masculinity isn't a social invention. It's an ancient mode of being, carved by evolution, shaped by myth, passed through generations. When I speak of masculinity, I'm not talking about dominance or oppression. I'm talking about the archetype of the hero, the man who confronts chaos, imposes order, and carries the weight of responsibility. But today, young men are told that masculinity is toxic, that ambition is dangerous, that the desire to lead is a symptom of patriarchy. This lie drains them of purpose, leaving shame where strength should be. From a Jungian lens, masculinity is symbolized by the father, the king, the warrior. Not as people, but as patterns of action. Stories older than civilization, still echoing in our dreams. A boy doesn't become a man by chasing pleasure. He becomes a man by disciplining desire, by choosing responsibility, by aiming at the highest good he can imagine and moving toward it. This isn't about control, it's about structure, order born not of force, but of choice. Masculinity is not a performance. It is a way of being, earned through sacrifice, trial, and courage. And the world is starving for this. Not brute power, but virtue, not dominance, but direction. But what happens when the father is gone? The absence of a father isn't just physical, it's psychological. Without him, the boundary between instinct and law never forms. The child remains trapped, longing for guidance, yet lost without it. This creates instability, perfectionism, rebellion, or deep emotional emptiness. Men without fathers often seek substitutes, someone to please or to defy, but the longing remains, buried, unspoken, unresolved. Healing begins not by moving on, but by facing what was missing, and building within the father they never had.
Masculinity, as we understand it today, is not born, it is built. It is not a given, but a psychological construction formed through conflict, repression, and adaptation. In the earliest stages of life, the male child is entangled in a deep drama, the Oedipus complex. This is not merely a myth, but a profound psychological truth. The boy experiences desire for the mother and rivalry with the father. These unconscious drives are not chosen. They arise from the id, raw instinct, unfiltered and amoral. To resolve this tension, the boy must repress his forbidden desires and identify with the father, the very figure he once saw as a rival. Through this identification, masculinity begins to take shape, not as freedom, but as compromise. Not as expression, but as suppression. This process is painful but necessary. Civilization demands the sacrifice of instinct for the sake of order. Masculinity, in Freud's view, is one such sacrifice. The ego is sculpted by cultural norms. The superego emerges from internalized authority, and the boy learns to play the role that society demands. But repression always leaves traces. The unconscious does not forget. What is denied returns in dreams, symptoms, neuroses. Masculinity becomes a mask that hides vulnerability, dependency, and unresolved longing. In clinical practice, I have seen how often men suffer under the burden of this mask. They seek power, success, even aggression, not from strength, but from a deep, unconscious need to affirm their identity against childhood fear and loss. True understanding comes when a man dares to look inward, into the primal scene of his development. Only then can he begin to integrate the shadow of his desires and reshape his masculinity with awareness. Masculinity is not essence, it is structure. And within that structure, a tension always lives between instinct and civilization, desire and law, the boy and the father.
Is fatherlessness a root cause of today's identity crisis?
The absence of the father isn't just a personal tragedy, it's a cultural catastrophe. When a father is missing, either physically or psychologically, the child loses the first model of order, the guide who shows how to transform potential into purpose. Young men especially suffer from this loss. The father is the one who teaches you how to engage with the world, how to stand up straight, face chaos, and become someone worth being. Without him, boys drift. They lack direction. They become resentful, nihilistic, or apathetic. Our society downplays the importance of fatherhood. It treats male influence as disposable, even dangerous. But the data and the experience of countless individuals tell another story. Fatherlessness increases the risk of addiction, crime, depression, and a profound crisis of identity. This isn't about dominance, it's about initiation. The father is meant to say, "I see who you are, and I know who you could become." That vision, that encouragement, is what calls a boy out of passivity and into manhood. Even in mythological stories, the father plays a central role, either as the wise king who empowers or the tyrant who must be overcome. In both cases, the confrontation with the father is essential to becoming an integrated self. When the father is absent, something must fill the void. Sometimes it's the state, sometimes it's the gang, sometimes it's ideology. But none of these can replace the deep personal transformation that occurs when a young man is called into responsibility by someone who loves him and expects more. I've seen this again and again in clinical practice. Young men paralyzed by chaos because no one ever taught them how to shoulder it. The answer isn't to dismiss the role of fathers. It's to restore it, to recognize that the path to identity runs straight through the challenge of responsibility, and the father is the first one who dares you to walk it.
The absence of the father is not merely a loss in the physical world, it is a psychological rupture, a disturbance in the architecture of the mind. In early development, the father plays a crucial symbolic role. He is not just a parent, but the first external authority, the figure who intervenes between the child and the mother. It is through this intervention that the child's desires are shaped, limited, and ultimately humanized. When the father is absent, this crucial boundary never fully forms. The child remains trapped in an unconscious fusion with the mother, an unresolved Oedipal longing that stunts identity. Without the father's symbolic presence, there is no one to say no, no one to sever the tie between instinct and social law. In such a vacuum, the superego becomes unstable, either too weak to provide structure or cruel and excessive, formed through guilt rather than love. The child grows into an adult whose identity is fragmented, caught between primitive drives and the desperate need for approval. This condition manifests in many forms: neurotic perfectionism, violent rebellion, or deep emotional emptiness. Men without fathers often search for substitutes, authority figures to please or to defy, never quite able to resolve the original conflict. But repression does not heal, it buries. The longing for the father, his guidance, his limits, remains active in the unconscious, shaping behavior from the shadows. In my work, I have seen how often the absent father becomes a ghost, haunting the psyche, influencing choices, relationships, even self-worth. To heal this absence is not simply to move on. It is to confront the desire itself, to bring into consciousness what was never given form. Only through insight, deep, painful, honest, can the individual begin to rebuild a self where a father once stood.
Which leads to a more fulfilling life, discipline or desire?
Desire is easy. It's instinctive, biological, impulsive, but meaning, that's something you have to earn. And the path to meaning is discipline. We live in a culture that elevates desire and pleasure above all else. Do what you feel. Follow your heart. But what happens when your feelings are chaotic? When your impulses lead you nowhere? Discipline is not repression. It's not about denying desire. It's about ordering it. It's the act of voluntarily placing limits on yourself so that something higher can emerge. When you delay gratification, when you sacrifice what you want now for what matters most later, you're telling the world and yourself that you believe in a better future, that your life is worth structuring. This is the essence of meaning, and it's ancient. In the story of Cain and Abel, Abel makes the best sacrifice. He brings the first of his flock, the finest of what he has. He understands that the divine, the future, the ideal, demands something of you. Discipline is that sacrifice. It's waking up early, saying the truth, bearing responsibility even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And over time, this process transforms you. It turns chaos into order. Desire alone leads to addiction, aimlessness, and despair. We see it everywhere. A society obsessed with pleasure, but hollowed out by anxiety and confusion. Discipline, by contrast, creates strength, integrity, purpose. It doesn't suppress your potential. It unlocks it. It aligns your action with your highest values, not your lowest impulses. In my clinical work, I have seen lives turned around not by indulging desire, but by embracing routine, order, structure. The question isn't, how do I feel today? The question is, what aim justifies the suffering of my existence? Discipline is the answer. Voluntary suffering in the service of a meaningful goal. It's what turns a person into who they could be, not by force, but by choice.
Civilization begins where desire ends. The raw instinct of man, aggressive, sexual, self-serving, must be tamed if we are to live together. This taming does not come from freedom. It comes from repression. The child is born into a world of rules it did not choose, and so begins the conflict. The ego must learn to navigate the demands of the id, the seat of primitive drives, and the superego, the voice of internalized authority. Discipline, in this view, is not noble. It is necessary, a mechanism of survival. We repress not because we are moral, but because we must function within the social order, and this repression comes at a cost. Desire does not disappear. It hides. It returns in dreams, slips of the tongue, neuroses. The very achievements of civilization, art, religion, law, are born from this inner tension, sublimation, the redirection of forbidden urges into socially acceptable forms. But the greater the repression, the greater the psychic toll. Guilt, anxiety, self-hatred, these are the symptoms of a society that demands the denial of instinct. The disciplined man may appear strong, but beneath the surface, he wrestles with ghosts. We speak of freedom, but we are never free from our unconscious. The more we suppress, the more our hidden desires control us from the shadows. True psychological growth does not come from blind obedience to discipline. It comes from understanding the forces within, the drives we fear, the impulses we deny. Only then can we act with awareness rather than repression. Civilization is a fragile compromise between instinct and structure. The price we pay for peace is the suppression of the self. Discipline in this context is not virtue, it is sacrifice, a constant negotiation between what we want and what society demands. The question is not how to be good, it is how to live honestly with the desires that make us human.
What is the root cause of the modern man's suffering?
The modern man doesn't suffer because life is hard. He suffers because life is empty. In the past, suffering had a context. Pain had a purpose. People lived inside stories, religious, mythological, cultural, that gave meaning to their struggles. Today, those stories have collapsed. Postmodernism tells us that truth is relative, that identity is fluid, that morality is subjective. But with this rejection of structure comes a devastating cost: nihilism. Young men come into my practice overwhelmed, not because they are weak, but because they have nothing to aim at. They've been told that ambition is toxic, that masculinity is dangerous, that their instinct to strive and achieve is a relic of oppression. But the truth is this: without meaning, suffering becomes unbearable. And meaning is not found in comfort. It's found in responsibility. The modern man suffers because he has no clear path. He's paralyzed by too many options and no guiding principle. He's drowning in freedom with no map. He needs order. He needs something worth sacrificing for, something to lift, to carry, to build toward. This is not a call to rigid ideology. It's a call to purpose. Start small, clean your room, tell the truth, pick up the heaviest load you can carry and walk forward. That's the path through chaos. Meaning isn't a luxury. It's a necessity. It aligns your suffering with something noble. It tells you why you're here and what you're meant to become. Modern suffering is not just psychological, it's spiritual. It's a crisis of significance in a world that mocks belief and glorifies doubt. But belief, real, grounded belief, is what anchors the soul. To heal, modern man must reconnect with that ancient truth, that life is suffering. But voluntary suffering, in the service of a meaningful aim, redeems it.
Modern man suffers, not from external threats, but from internal conflict. His suffering is the consequence of psychic division, a war within the self. The psyche is not unified. It is composed of three warring parts: the id, driven by raw instinct; the superego, shaped by moral authority; and the ego, caught in the middle, struggling to maintain balance. The id demands pleasure, immediate, animalistic, unapologetic. The superego, in contrast, is harsh, punitive, formed from the internalized voices of parents, teachers, society. It whispers of guilt, shame, and punishment, and the ego, poor, fragile ego, must negotiate this battlefield. It must mediate between desire and duty, instinct and ideal. The result is constant tension, anxiety, repression. This is the neurosis of modern life. In the past, tradition and religion provided structure. They offered symbolic frameworks to contain the chaos within. But today, these structures are weakening. The superego becomes confused, the ego is left unaided, and the id, the oldest part of the mind, does not sleep. So modern man is not liberated. He is lost, torn between instinct he cannot act upon and morality he cannot fully believe. He suffers not from a lack of resources, but from a disintegration of the self. Symptoms arise: depression, compulsions, anxieties, all signs of an ego overwhelmed by inner contradiction. The solution is not to silence the conflict, but to understand it. Through psychoanalysis, the unconscious is made conscious. The patient confronts his desires, his fears, his repressed memories, not to eliminate them, but to integrate them. Man must face the truth that he is divided, that suffering is not failure, but the cost of being civilized. To be modern is to live with this tension, to accept the conflict, not escape it. Only then can suffering be transformed into insight, into growth, into awareness.
What does masculinity mean in today's society?
There's a war on masculinity today, and it's not just cultural, it's psychological. I've seen it in universities, in media, in therapy rooms. Young men are told that their very nature is dangerous, that ambition is oppressive, that strength is suspect. But without masculinity, there is no order. Civilization itself is built on the shoulders of men who took responsibility, who faced chaos and imposed structure. To deny the masculine is to deny the very force that holds the world together. We're not witnessing liberation. We're witnessing confusion. Boys grow up without clear models of manhood. They're told to be soft, sensitive, harmless. But a harmless man is not a good man. A good man is one who has power and keeps it in check. Masculinity, at its core, is the ability to confront suffering with courage. It's the impulse to protect, to build, to bear the burden of existence. When we strip men of these instincts, we don't get peace. We get passivity, resentment, and chaos. This attack on masculinity has consequences. Look around: rising depression, aimlessness, addiction. These aren't just personal issues, they're cultural symptoms. Men without purpose become dangerous, not because they're masculine, but because they're unformed. You cannot ask a man to become whole by cutting away the parts of him that disturb you. You guide him. You challenge him. You teach him to master himself. That's why initiation matters. That's why discipline, hierarchy, and responsibility matter. A mature society doesn't castrate its men. It cultivates them. If we continue down this path, mocking strength, dismantling order, equating masculinity with tyranny, we will lose something vital. Not just to men, but to everyone who depends on them. Masculinity is not the problem. The real danger is a world that no longer understands what men are for.
Masculinity in its modern form wears 1,000 masks, but beneath them repression still reigns. I have long maintained that civilization demands the suppression of instinct. To live in society, man must renounce the pleasures of the id. But what happens when this repression becomes too great, too unconscious, too disconnected from understanding? Neurosis, anxiety, a disoriented self. In today's world, the masculine ideal is caught in contradiction. He is expected to be strong, yet gentle, ambitious, yet selfless, dominant, yet deferential. These paradoxes fracture the psyche. They create inner conflict that is rarely confronted and instead pushed deeper into the unconscious. Men today are not free from repression. They are trapped by new forms of it. Cultural norms shift rapidly. Desires that were once spoken are now silenced. But repression does not eliminate desire. It only drives it underground. And what is buried returns, disguised as addiction, aggression, or despair. In my clinic, I saw again and again, when a man is disconnected from his inner life, he becomes a stranger to himself. He might project power, but inside, he is fragmented, unaware of the true forces shaping his behavior. Modern masculinity suffers because it has lost access to the symbolic, to myth, to ritual, to unconscious meaning. Men lack initiation into manhood, not by culture, but by psyche. Therapy becomes the new rite of passage. Here, he must revisit his earliest identifications, his father, his rivals, his first forbidden wishes. Only then can he begin to reconcile the man he is with the man he was taught to be. Masculinity is not toxic, but when it is repressed, distorted, or denied, it becomes dangerous. The goal is not to erase the masculine, but to bring it into consciousness, to understand its roots, its symbols, its suffering. Modern man must turn inward, for until he knows what he's hiding, he can never know who he really is.
Final statements. Who defines masculinity?
Masculinity is not arbitrary. It's ancient, it's functional, and it's earned. You don't define masculinity. You live it. You embody it through action, through responsibility, through strength willingly offered in service to something greater. A culture that abandons masculinity abandons its spine. Yes, there is danger in masculine energy, but there is far greater danger in its absence. Men are not problems to be solved. They are forces to be directed. You don't help a man by softening him. You help him by challenging him to grow into competence and character. We ignore this truth at our peril.
Masculinity is not a fixed identity. It is a psychological negotiation. A man is shaped by his instincts, yes, but also by his father, his rivals, the demands of society. He represses, he internalizes, he adapts. Yet underneath, the primal desires remain. The question is not what masculinity is, but how it is made conscious. Is it merely the product of cultural forces, or does it emerge from deeper psychic tensions between desire and morality, freedom and responsibility? In therapy, we see the fragments, the contradictions, the masks, but we also see the yearning for wholeness, for meaning, for permission to be fully human. Masculinity must be examined, not asserted. It is not defined by the outer world alone, but by the hidden structures within.
We've reached the end of this debate. Hope it was helpful and insightful. Before you go, make sure to subscribe. See you next time.